Okay, so today we're going to be going over the Gettysburg Address, which was delivered on November 19th, 1863. So the first thing that comes to mind when I see the Gettysburg Address is Abraham Lincoln. The two are synonymous with each other. We know that he is both the author and speaker of the address. I also wonder where Gettysburg is at. I know it's in Pennsylvania, but we should look it up on a map at some point. So we highlight that. Okay. But I also think of the Civil War when I think of the Gettysburg Address, which was in full force at this point in history. The Battle of Gettysburg was a huge victory for the North and took place in July of the very year. Maybe Lincoln is writing to congratulate soldiers. Maybe he's offering condolences to those who lost their lives in the battle. When I look at the address itself, I can see that it's relatively short, which is kind of nice. So let's get going. So as we start off, we see 7 years ago. And that's something we've probably all have heard at some point in pop culture. But what exactly does a score mean? I went ahead and looked it up on Google earlier, and it turns out a score means 20 years. So 7 years equates to 87 years ago. I wonder what he's referring to at that point in history, that long ago. So 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. So when he says father brought forth, I assume he means the founding fathers of the United States. As we go on, this becomes pretty clear that that's what he's referring to, along with the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence that promise liberty and equality for all men. So we go on to the second part. So as we get into the next section, we seem to be past the introduction, and this might be getting into the meat of the address. So he mentions the Civil War, which is currently raging and testing our resolve as a country. He says, now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, and can long endure. So testing nation, we talked about that. Civil War, we know that's happening right now. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. So he says that it's the site of a great battle. When he says great, he means large in size and not great as in something good. So that's something that you can you'd have to infer based on the reading. Now he says that he's there to dedicate part of the field in memorial to those who lost their lives in the battle. When reading this, I see him standing on a stage reading from a podium to a large crowd of soldiers or maybe victims' families or politicians. I also see Lincoln wearing his classic black suit and large top hat as he addresses the crowd. That's something he's pretty synonymous with. So we still have a big section of the address left, the final section. But he's talked about all the stuff we predicted earlier, so I wonder what he's going to be talking about next. Let's find out. Okay, so now we're on the final section of the document. So it also happens to be the longest, so let's get started with that. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. So what does the word consecrate means? Sometimes it's good to have a dictionary or some online version nearby to help clarify some of these big words that are typical in these older speeches. So based on reading the next section, it seems like consecrate means to disrespect or ruin something. So we see the brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it, far above our power to add or detract. So even if you don't have a dictionary at your disposal, sometimes if you read on, the meaning may become clear. And we see consecrated used again as well in Lincoln's speech. Lincoln seems to be saying that they will remember the actions that take place here, but not so much the words. He says, "The world will no long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task of remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which here gave the last full measure of devotion." So he says he will need to make sure that these soldiers basically did not die in vain, and that we carry on with our goal for freedom for everyone. He mentions God in the final portion. As you can see, he says that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. He mentions God at the end, which tells us he's religious, and he's appealing to other religious folks as well. The last section there is about the government of the people, by the people, for the people, and it's a really popular phrase that's used today, and something that really ended his speech with something that resonates with the North. So, as we've seen, if we go through and break down a text together as a class, these complicated documents can seem much more manageable, broken down into chunks and speaking together as a class. So there you go.